She probably assumed that he had sailed, but he had promised to write to her from Seal Bay and again from San Jose. And the uncertainty about his Mexican affairs was unbearable for a man with an active mind and highly nervous system. His only solace was Mr. Larkin's assurance that the national ship Joven Guipuzcoana was expected within the month and would return immediately. In the early part of the 4th week, the assurance came true, and by the time he was ready to sail again, his risk of infection was over. However, he boarded the ship without writing to Selina. The journey lasted a month, boring and repetitive, more challenging than his slow progress on land, because at least there he could find some peace of mind through intense exercise. He spent his time alternating between walking on the deck, when the weather allowed, and writing to Selina, long personal letters that would reveal her true self to her, just like his own strong presence could. At San Blas, he sent his letters and welcomed the rough overland journey to the capital. However, beneath his calm exterior, he felt uneasy. As often happens, though, his fears turned out to be products of an unhealthy state of mind and a tendency to associate every cause with an equally significant effect. Santa Anna greeted him warmly and was willing to listen to his plans. That cunning and astute politician, always up to date with the latest developments and never falling behind, saw in Melendez the future leader. Knowing that the United States would inevitably take control of California, Santa Anna was eager to form an alliance with the man who he predicted would have power over the region, both at home and in Washington. Moreover, he acknowledged that Mexico was powerless to interfere, aside from empty threats, with the determined actions of any rebellious Californian. However, it was crucial to Melendez's goals that the central government guarantee his governorship and divert the attention of the Mexican Congress elsewhere. Santa Anna understood the significance of the moral impact that its apparent approval would have on rebellious individuals from the South. "I am here to assist you," stated Santa Anna, "and the governorship is yours. Just make sure that no rumors of your true intentions reach Congress until you are firmly established. If it relentlessly opposes you and clings to California like a dog with a bone bigger than itself, I would have to give in. I have too much at stake. I will ensure that any messages from enemies, including Iturbe Isala, are opened by me first." Melendez wrote to Selina again through the ship that departed during his short stay in the capital, and his intention was to go directly to Santa Barbara upon arriving in California. However, when he arrived in Seal Bay, disinfected and unconcerned as before, he learned that she was about to leave, perhaps already had, for Fort Ross to visit the Rochefs. The news pleased him. He had wanted to say what he still needed to say in his own forests. And then, the plan that had been restlessly brewing in his mind for many months took on an urgent form. He decided that if there was gold in California, he would extract the secret from its guardian, through gentle or violent means, within the next 24 hours. Chapter 29. Melendez halted his horse the following night in front of the abandoned mission of San Rafael. The valley, surrounded by dark hills adorned with towering redwood trees, showed no signs of the bustling life it once had before secularization. The priest now lived a solitary existence, serving as the caretaker of this shadowy valley. As he heard the traveler approaching, he opened the door to his room, his tired eyes squinting. Though naturally grumpy, he showed great respect to the man who held immense power in California and had generously provided him with many cattle. From his meager supplies, he prepared a simple supper for him and stacked the logs in the open fireplace. November had arrived, and after opening a bottle of wine from Melendez's saddlebag, the priest attempted to mimic the joviality of a hermit. Late at night, they still sat on opposite sides of the table in the dusty, deserted room. The forgotten had been entertained with vivid and ever-changing images of the great city where he had spent his childhood. He smiled occasionally. Every now and then he let out a quick, impatient sigh. Suddenly, Melendez leaned forward and fixed him with his intense gaze. "Are there riches in these mountains?" he asked abruptly. The priest was momentarily caught off guard. A look of significance flashed in his eyes, then one of cunning replaced it. "Perhaps, Mr. Don Jose. Riches are often found in the ground, But if I possessed such unholy knowledge, I would keep it to myself. Riches are the plague in the heart of the world. It is not the Church's role to spread the evil far and wide. Melendez clenched his teeth. Zealotry was a more formidable opponent than greed. Indeed, my father. But consider the good that riches have brought. Could these missions have been constructed without riches? Could these thousands of Native Americans have been converted to Christianity? What you say is not entirely false. However, for every good, 10,000 evils are brought about by the metal that the devil mixed in hell and poured into the earth's veins. Melendez spent 30 minutes vividly illustrating the debt that civilization owed to the existence and circulation of riches. The priest argued that California was evidence that commerce could thrive through trade. The money in the region was insignificant. And no significant progress in 100 years, retorted Melendez. He then elaborated on the extraordinary future that California could have if it had riches to develop its incredible resources. The priest claimed that to strip California of its idyllic simplicity would set it on a path to damnation, alongside the corrupt nations of the Old World. Melendez showed that if there was corruption in the older civilizations, there was also a higher level of intellectual advancement, and that religion remained strong. He might as well have spoken to the walls of the mission. He enticed with the promise of one of the more central missions. The priest had only the dust of ambition in the depths of his mind. Finally, he lost his patience. "I must have money," he said shortly, "and you will show me where to find it. You once revealed to my father that you knew of its existence in these hills, and you will provide me with the key." The priest looked into the eyes of the resolute and disdainful face before him and closed his lips. He was alone with a desperate man. He didn't even have a servant. He could be killed, and his killer would go unnoticed. But the heart of the fanatic burned within him. He remained silent. "You recognize me," said Melendez. "I owe a significant portion of my power in California to the fact that I do not make a threat today and forget it tomorrow. You will show me where that money is, or I will kill you. The servant of God dies when his time comes. If I am to die by the hand of the assassin, so be it." Melendez leaned forward and placed his strong hand around the priest's loose throat, pushing the table against his chest. He pressed his thumb against the throttle, his index finger firmly against the jugular, and the tongue rolled over the teeth, the congested eyes bulging. "Perhaps you despise death, but you may not appreciate the manner of it. I have no desire to kill you. Whether alive or dead, your life is no more valuable than that of a worm. However, you will die, and die with great discomfort, unless you do as I desire." His hand loosened its grip, but still pressed against the rough, dirty throat. "Accursed heretic," said the priest. "Spare your curses for the superstitious," he said. He noticed a cunning gleam in the priest's eyes. "All right, then. If I have to, I will. Allow me to stand up, and I will guide you." Melendez took a piece of rope from his saddlebag and tied it around both his and the priest's waists. "If you have any holy traps planned for me, at least we can enjoy each other's company. And if I am led into mazes to die of hunger, you will at least have a meal. I couldn't eat you." If the priest was unsettled, he didn't show it. He grabbed a lantern from a shelf, lit the small piece of candle, and opened a door at the rear, leading them through a series of inner rooms. All of them were filled with garbage. In one room, he accidentally discovered a trap door with his foot and descended the crude steps carved into the earth. The air grew cold and damp, and Melendez knew they were now in the tunnel of the mission, the secret escape route to the hills that the early fathers built as a last resort in case of defeat by native tribes. As they reached the bottom of the steps, the flickering light of the tallow dip only illuminated a small area. Melendez couldn't get a sense of the craftsmanship of the tunnel, except that it was no more than 6 feet tall, as his hat brushed against the ceiling, and that the floor and walls seemed to be made of compacted clay. There was ventilation somewhere, but no light. They walked for a mile or so until Melendez felt like he was stepping into a larger and taller space. "We are no longer in the tunnel," the priest declared. He raised the lantern and swung it above his head. Melendez saw that they were in a circular room, likely carved out of the heart of a hill. He also noticed something else. "What is that?" he exclaimed sharply. The priest handed him the lantern. "See for yourself," he replied. Melendez grabbed the flashlight and, holding it above his head and close to the walls, slowly explored the room. It was surrounded by 3 layers of crystal-like quartz, filled with sparkling yellow specks and chunks. Each layer was about 3 feet wide. "There's a fortune here!" he exclaimed. He felt none of the greed for gold, only a recognition of its power. "Yes, sir. Enough to pay off a nation's debt. Where are we? Under what hill? I'm sorry I didn't have a compass with me. It was impossible to accurately guess the direction in that slanted tunnel. Where's the exit?" The priest remained silent. Melendez turned to him, demanding an answer. "Tell me, how can I find this place from outside?" "You'll never find it from outside. When the threat from Native Americans was gone, a devout father sealed the entrance. This gold isn't for you. You wouldn't even be able to locate the trapdoor on your own." "Then why did you bring me here? To torment you? To punish you for disrespecting the church through me? Kill me now if you want. Death is better than hell." Melendez quickly surveyed the room. There was no way out other than the one they had entered through, and no signs of any other exits. He pounced on the priest and shook him vigorously until his loose teeth rattled. "You wretch!" he exclaimed. "You've deceived me with your ignorant superstition. Take me out of here through the other entrance immediately, so I can wait on the hill until morning. I won't trust your word. You'll have to tell me, even if I have to torture you." The priest made a sudden leap and grappled with Melendez, embracing him like a bear. The flashlight fell and went out. The 2 men stumbled blindly in the darkness, colliding with the walls, wrestling desperately. The priest resorted to biting and panted like a wild animal, but he was no match for the vigor and knowledge of his young opponent. Melendez overpowered him in an instant and tied him up with the rope. Then he found the flashlight and relit the candle. He returned to the priest and stood over him. The latter was physically defeated, but the stubbornness of his narrow-minded beliefs still shone in his eyes, although Melendez's gaze was not pleasant to confront. Melendez was furious. He had manipulated Santa Anna, one of the most cunning and self-centered men of his time, as easily as if he were a piece of ribbon. Machado, the most intelligent man ever born in California, was influenced by his judgment. Yet all the tactics that his intellect had mastered were useless against this ignorant priest. He held more respect for the dogs in his kennels, but unless he resorted to extreme measures, this creature would defeat him solely due to its brute ignorance. Melendez was not the type of man to stop just short of victory or to surrender to an enemy he despised. "You are in my power. I assume you realize that now. Will you show me another way out?" The priest curled his lip like a snarling dog, revealing his discolored teeth, but he did not respond otherwise. Melendez struck a match and, kneeling beside the priest, held it to his stubbly beard. As the flame licked his skin, the man let out a yell akin to that of a kicked animal. Melendez jumped to his feet, cursing. "I can't do it!" he exclaimed, filled with bitter disgust. "I don't have the cruelty within me. I am not suitable to be a ruler of men." He untied the rope from the prisoner's feet. "Get up," he said, "and lead me back the way we came." The priest scrambled to his feet and limped down the long tunnel. They climbed the steps beneath the mission and emerged back into the room. Melendez quickly turned to stop the trapdoor from closing, but only in time to hear it shut with a snap, and the priest kicked debris over it. He severed the rope that bound the other person's hands. "Go," he said. "I have no more use for you. And if you tell anyone about this, I don't need to explain that it will go worse for you than it will for me." The priest ran away, and Melendez, hanging the lantern on a hook, kicked away the debris with his feet, intending to walk around the room until dawn. However, he soon discovered that the despised hermit had some allies. 10,000 fleas, the bane of the area, attacked every part of his body they could reach. They swarmed down the legs of his boots, up his pants, up his sleeves, down his neck. There is no such thing as tragedy in life, he thought. He hung the lantern outside the door to mark the room and walked around the yard until morning. But there were still dark hours before dawn, and during one of them, a figure, while his back was turned, sneaked to the lantern and hung it in front of an adjacent room. When light came, and the fog arrived first, all of Melendez's attempts to find the trap door were unsuccessful, even though the yard was filled with the debris he threw into it from the room. He suspected the trick, but there were 10 identical rooms, and although he cleared most of them, he couldn't find any trace of the trapdoor. He looked at the hills surrounding the mission. There were many, and beyond that, there were more. He mounted his horse and rode around the buildings, listening carefully for a hollow echo. The tunnel was too far below. He heard nothing. He was defeated. For the first time in his life, he had no options, overwhelmed by a force stronger than his own determination, and his spirit was furious inside him. He didn't have the power to excavate the floors of the mission, as the mission and the surrounding land belonged to the church. The priest would never take him on that subterranean expedition again, as he had discovered the vulnerability in his defense, and he no longer feared death. Unless luck was on his side, or someone luckier came along, the untapped riches of the San Rafael Hill would remain undisturbed for eternity. Chapter 30. He turned away from the mission and rode towards his home, 60 miles in a fierce November wind. At Bodega Bay, he found out that Governor Rotchef had passed through there 2 days earlier with a group of guests and had gone down to Sausalito to meet them. Selina awaited him up north. A gentler feeling broke through the darkness of his spirit, and the flame of hope burned once more. There had to be gold elsewhere in California, and he vowed once again that he would find it. The final stretch of his journey followed the cliffs. Sometimes the steep hills covered in redwoods rose so suddenly from the trail that the undergrowth brushed against him as he passed by. On the other side, only a few inches stood between him and potential death amidst the crashing waves on the rocks 1,000 feet below. The seagulls screeched above him, while the sea lions barked with a hollow sound on the outer rocks, resembling those afflicted with illness. On the horizon, there was a bank of fog, outlined by the peaks and valleys of the mountain beside him. It sent a thin layer of fog gracefully gliding across the ocean, occasionally enveloping the redwoods, selectively clinging to some and disregarding others. Then the immense white mountain rushed over the roaring ocean, up the cliffs, and into the dark forests, obscuring the lone horseman from view. He arrived at his house, a large log structure, late at night. His staff came out to greet him, and within moments a fire blazed in the grand fireplace of his study. He lived alone. His parents and brothers were deceased, and his sisters were married. But the fire made the spacious room, adorned with animal skins and filled with books, as lively as a single man could hope for. He discovered a message from Princess Helene Rotchef, the renowned wife of the governor, inviting him to spend the upcoming week at Fort Ross. However, he was so exhausted that even the thought of Selina seemed distant. The message barely stirred any excitement. After dinner, he threw himself onto a sofa in front of the fire and slept until morning, then went to bed and slept until afternoon. By that time, he had regained his energy. He sent a cowboy ahead with his evening attire, and a couple of hours later set off for Fort Ross, urging his horse forward with a lighter spirit along the cliffs. His ranches bordered the Russian settlement. The journey from his house to the military enclosure was not a long one. He soon rounded the edge of a sloping hill and entered the expansive center formed by the mountains receding in a semicircle above the cliffs, and in which Fort Ross lay protected. The fort was enclosed by a fence made of redwood beams, hexagonal towers serving as bastions at diagonal corners. Cannons, mounted on carriages, were positioned at each of the 4 entrances, in the middle of the enclosure, and in the bastions. Guards patrolled the ramparts with unwavering vigilance. Inside were the elongated buildings occupied by the governor and officers, the barracks, and the Russian church, complete with its bell tower and dome. Beyond that was the town, a collection of huts accommodating approximately 800 Native Americans and Siberian prisoners, the laborers of the company. All the structures were made of redwood logs or planed boards, presenting a striking contrast to the white towns of the south. The curving mountains were darkened by redwoods, while the ocean growled incessantly. Melendez handed his reins to a soldier and proceeded directly to the house. A servant met him on the porch and led him to his room. It was late, and everyone else was getting ready for dinner. He changed out of his riding clothes into the evening attire of modern society and immediately went to the living room. Here everything was luxurious, with no indication of the hardships of a new country. A thick red carpet covered the floor, red tapestries adorned the walls, and the music of Mozart and Beethoven played on the grand piano. The furniture was opulent and comfortable, and the large carved table was filled with French novels and European magazines. The candles had not yet been brought in, but logs blazed in the open fireplace. As Melendez walked across the room, a woman dressed in black stood up from a deep chair, and he recognized Selina. He rushed forward eagerly and reached out his arms, but she gestured for him to stay back. "No, no," she said quickly. "I need to explain why I'm here. I couldn't refuse Princess Helen any longer. She's leaving soon. And I wanted to see you one more time before I withdraw from the world." "Withdraw from what?" "I'm not entering a convent. I can't leave my father. I'm going to retreat to the most secluded of our ranches, away from the world and its people. I'll take my father with me. Samboro and Salia will stay at Casa Grande." "Ridiculous!" he exclaimed impatiently. "Do you think I'll allow you to do any such thing? You know so little about me, my love, but we can discuss that later. We'll only have a few moments alone now. Tell me about yourself. How are you?" "I'll tell you about that another time." Just then, a door opened, and the governor and his wife entered, warmly welcoming Melendez. The governor was a handsome Russian with a naturally warm demeanor. The princess was a woman who exuded both grace and liveliness, possessing both flirtatiousness and dignity. She could charm and restrain, entice and suppress simultaneously. Even in this rugged and untamed environment, she put considerable thought into her attire. Tonight, her beautiful blonde appearance was perfectly complemented by a fashionable ensemble of fresh green garments, straight from Paris. Moments later, Samboro and Salia emerged, the former as dashing a gentleman as ever, albeit carrying the subdued air of married life, and the latter radiating a sense of impending motherhood. Then the officers and their spouses arrived, all resplendent in their evening attire, and shortly after, dinner was announced. Melendez sat to the right of his hostess, and the refined daughter of the salon kept the table engaged in light and lively conversation, sparkling herself without instilling fear in the hearts of her guests. She and Melendez were long-time friends and often engaged in spirited banter, occasionally leading to heated exchanges, as she was an incredibly clever woman. But tonight he paid her little attention. His focus was on Selina, and little else crossed his mind. Her eyes had darker shadows beneath them than those created by her eyelashes. Her face was pale and subtly hollowed. She had endured hardship, and not for the sake of her mother. "She shall endure no more," he thought. "We are going bear hunting tonight," he heard the governor announce eventually. "I would like to join," Selina responded swiftly. "I would like to go out tonight." Immediately, all the other women, except for Princess Helene and Salia, chimed in, expressing their desire to go as well. Rotchef, who would have preferred leaving them at home, graciously consented, and Melendez's spirits lifted instantly. He would have a chance to speak with Selina that night, something he hadn't dared to hope for, and he suspected that she had orchestrated this opportunity. The men stayed in the dining room after the ladies had left, and Melendez, back to his normal self and in his element among these worldly people, became lively and interested in the company of other men. He was as well liked by men as he was captivating to women, using his more subtle abilities. Samboro watched him with jealous impatience. No one wanted to listen to his eloquence when Melendez spoke. He had come to Fort Ross solely to have a conversation with his former enemy. As he listened to Melendez, who had temporarily shed his dictatorial air and ambitious watchfulness, and instead embraced the role of a man of the world enthusiastically participating in the merriment, Samboro felt a dull sense of inferiority growing within him. He sensed, rather than knew, that neither Mexico City nor fulfilled ambitions would grant him the assured ease, the perfect breeding, and the calm sense of power that so gracefully concealed the relentless will and infinite resourcefulness that made this Californian seem like a being from a higher realm in Samboro's eyes. And his hatred flared up once more. As the men finally got up to go to the drawing room, he asked Melendez to stay for a moment. "Will you fulfill your promise soon?" he asked when they were alone. "What promise?" Your promise to send me as a representative to the next Mexican Congress." Melendez looked at him thoughtfully. He had little patience for someone of inferior intellect, and while he acknowledged the man's potential for causing trouble, he trusted his own cunning to outsmart him. He had already dealt with him by warning Santa Anna, and he decided not to be bothered by him any longer. Besides, as a brother-in-law, he would be unbearable, except at a safe distance of mutual animosity. "I made no promise to you," he said deliberately, "and I will make none. I don't want you in Mexico City." Samboro's face turned pale. "You dare say that to me, and yet you want to marry my sister?" "I do, and I will. And yet you wouldn't help her brother. Her brother means nothing to me compared to any man I've spent time with tonight. Don't expect anything from that. You can stay in Santa Barbara and act like a privileged person, which suits you perfectly, or become a prisoner in your own house." And he exited the room. Chapter 31. An hour later, they gathered in the square to begin their bear hunt. Samboro was not part of the group. Melendez helped Selina onto her horse and stood next to her briefly while the others got on their horses. He lightly touched her hand and said, "We couldn't ask for a more stunning night. I've always wished that my father had included this place when he applied for his land. I would love to live with you here, even when the winds rage and the rain pounds against the window. There's no place more enchanting than Fort Ross. The Russians are leaving. One day, I'll buy it for you." She didn't respond, but she didn't pull her hand away either. He held it tightly and looked around slowly. Despite his deep familiarity with life, he felt a sense of connection with nature, perhaps even more so in that moment. He saw not only her presence, but also the indescribable mystery that hangs over California once the sun sets. Maybe he was also troubled by an uneasy feeling, one that sometimes plagues mortals despite their limitations. He would never see Fort Ross again. On the horizon, the mist hovered and moved, marched like a battalion of ocean spirits, suddenly came together and emitted small bursts of smoke, as from the crater of a ghostly volcano. The moon, full and bright and cold, hung low in the dark sky. One hardly noticed the stars. The vast expanse of water was as calm as a lake, dark and metallic like the sky, barely reflecting the silver light in between. But despite its calmness, it was not quiet. It greeted the forbidding rocks beyond the shore, the long, irregular line of stark, storm-battered cliffs, with an ominous rumble, occasionally releasing a spray of water high in the air, as if mockingly showing its power even in slumber. From time to time it moaned, as if lamenting the stones that storms had dislodged, or waves had torn from the cliffs above, a lament for the Russians who had lost their heads, for the one who had been forced to walk the plank, or for Natalie Ivanhoff's lover. Here and there the cliffs were intersected by deep, winding ravines, with low brushwood growing on their sides. But the three plateaus rising successively from the ocean to the forest on the mountain were almost bare. On the highest plateau between two ravines, on a hill so barren and dark and isolated that its fate must have been taken into account at the time of creation, stood a tall, crude cross and around 50 neglected graves. The forest appeared even darker just behind it, the shadows thicker in the ravines that embraced it, and the ocean grayer and seemingly infinite in front of it. "Natalie Ivanhoff rests there in her bronze coffin," said Melendez, "already forgotten." The curve of the mountain was so perfect that it seemed to extend its long arms on either side and grasp the cliffs. The redwoods on its peak and upper slopes cast rigid shadows, with only their tips sharply outlined against the night sky. They could have been a barrier around an unexplored land. "Let's go!" Rotchev exclaimed. "We're ready to go!" And Melendez quickly mounted his horse. "I don't envy you," Princess Helene said from the porch, her silver head barely visible beneath the cozy fur she was wrapped in. "I prefer the warmth of the fire." "Are you warmly dressed?" Melendez asked Selina. "But you have the spirit of the South in your veins." They climbed the steep road between the levels, slowly, with the women chatting and asking questions, and the men explaining and giving advice. Melendez and Selina had much to say, but remained silent. A chilly gust of air, The muffled roar of a mountain stream rushed out of the forest, surprising them with its sudden impact. At one point, a panther let out a human-like cry. They entered the forest. It was so dark that the horses veered off the trail and into the underbrush repeatedly. Conversation ceased. There was no sound apart from the muffled sound of the horses' hooves and the babbling of the water. Selina had never experienced such profound stillness. The towering trees seemed to resent intrusion, threatening eternal silence. She moved her horse closer to Melendez's, and he took her hand. Occasionally there would be a break in the trees, revealing a deep darkness, as the moon had not yet reached the forest. They reached the summit and began their descent. Halfway down the mountain, they arrived at a farm nestled in a valley created by one of the many basins. The Native Americans were waiting and immediately slaughtered a bull, placing the carcass in a prominent spot. Then everyone retreated to the shade of the trees. In less than 30 minutes, a bear emerged from the forest and began feasting on the meal that had been thoughtfully provided. When his attention was fully engaged, Rachef and the officers, mounted on their horses, charged at him, swinging their lassos. The bear put up a fight and stood his ground, but this was a situation where the bear always ended up worse off. One lasso caught his neck, another his hind foot, and he was quickly strained and strangled to death. No sooner was he dispatched than another appeared, then another, and the activity became very thrilling, capturing the attention of both women and men. Melendez lifted Selina from her horse. "Let's walk," he said. "They won't notice our absence. Just a few yards more, and you'll be in my territory. That's where I want you to be." She didn't object, and they entered the forest. The moon shone down through the tall redwoods that seemed to scrape against its crystal surface. The constant sound of the distant sea blended with the faint noise of the treetops. The vast dark aisles were undisturbed by any other sound. He took her hand and held it for a moment, then linked his arm with hers. "Now, tell me everything," he said. "They'll be occupied for a long time. The night belongs to us." "I've come here to confess my love for you," she said. "Ah, can I make you tremble? It was impossible for me not to tell you. I couldn't find peace in my seclusion without having the final word with you, without letting you know me. And I want to tell you that I've suffered tremendously. You might want to know that, because no one else in the world could have caused me such pain, and no one else ever will. Only your touch could twist my heartstrings and tear my heart out of my chest. I suffered initially because I doubted you, then because I fell in love with you, then the torment of jealousy and the agony of separation, and finally those dreadful 3 months of silence. I couldn't stay at Casa Grande. Everything connected to you drove me insane. Oh, I have experienced all sorts of situations. But the last one was the worst, after I heard from you again, and all other reasons were resolved, and I knew that you were well and still loved me. The realization that I could never mean anything to you, even though I could mean so much. The agony of this realization was so painful that there was only one escape: imagination. I closed my eyes to my small world and lived with you, and it felt like I gained complete understanding of you. Let me explain what I intuited. You may argue that I am mistaken, but I don't believe you will. I believe that in the short time we were together, I absorbed you. It seemed to me that your soul always yearned for something just beyond reach, restless in moments that would satisfy someone else, frustrated with a strange longing for something different when a fervent wish was granted, immersed beneath all the reckless enjoyment of life, with the bitter knowledge of life's inability to satisfy. Could the dissatisfied, wandering mind linger long enough to offer a woman more than the promise of happiness? But never mind that. With this understanding of you, my own irresistible desire for variety vanished. My nature focused on one paramount wish: to be everything to you. What I had vaguely felt before and suppressed, the emptiness of life, the certainty of boredom, I completely rejected now that they were personified in you. I refused to acknowledge their existence. I could make you happy. How could imagination conjure such scenarios, such perfect unity, such companionship, if reality did not exist? Imagination is the product of inherited and current impressions. I might exaggerate, but even without embellishment, the reality must be sweeter and more fulfilling than anything else on this planet, at the very least. and I knew that you loved me. Oh, I felt that. And the diversity of your nature and desires, even though they might drive me crazy at times, would bring an incredible excitement to life. I was no longer the doomswoman. I was an additional being who could understand and complement your every mood, someone who would comprehend so deeply that I could be a man, a woman, and a friend to you. A delusion. But as long as I will never know, let me believe. An extraordinary chaotic desire that surged within me like a wave and often shook me in the beginning had, in those last sorrowful weeks, less influence on my thoughts. It seemed to me that was the expression, the heartfelt essence of love. But there was so much more. I don't understand that, however, and never will. But I wanted to tell you everything. I couldn't rest until you knew me as I am and as you had made me. And I'll tell you this, too, she exclaimed, suddenly breaking down. I wanted you so much. Oh, I needed you so. It wasn't just me who could give, and it is so difficult for a woman to stand alone. He remained silent for a moment, but he forgot about all his other interests, plans, and ideas stored in his impatient mind. He was thrilled to his core, filled with the triumphant feeling that he was about to embrace the woman created for him from his own elements. "Talk to me," she said. "My love, I have so much to say to you that it will take all the years we will spend together to say it all. No, don't talk about that. I am firm on that matter. Even if the suffering of the past months were to be multiplied 1,000 times in the future, I wouldn't marry you." Melendez, realizing that their decisive moment had arrived and that the outcome rested solely on him, was not the type to hesitate between the happiness this woman alone could provide and the dull existence she would have imposed on both of them due to her ignorance. His strong determination had already taken hold of the future without mercy. However, understanding the way women think, he believed it was best to let Selina express her thoughts freely, so that there would be less to object to when he conveyed his heart and passion to hers. "It may seem absurd to debate this matter," he said, "but if you wish, please reiterate your reasons, and we will settle them once and for all. My love, do not think for a moment that I do not value your reasons. I only value them because they are yours, as they themselves are not worthy of consideration. But they are. It has been an unwritten rule for 4 generations that a Melendez and an Iturbi Isala should not marry. The animosity started, as you should know, when a member from each family served as officers in a detachment of troops sent to protect the missions during their construction. And my father recently told me that he loved your father's sister for many years, which is why he married so late in life, and he never pursued her because of her lineage and the injustices her father had committed against his family. Should his daughter be weak where he was strong? You discard traditions as if they were apple seeds, but remember they flow in my veins. And what about the vow I made? Have you forgotten that? And its words? The church stands between us. I will tell you all. The priest has forbidden me to marry you. He forbade it every time I confessed, not only because of my vow, but because you had aroused in me a love so terrible that I almost took the life of another woman. Could I bring you back to the church, it might be different, but you rule others. No one could remold you. You see it as hopeless. It is no use to argue. I have no intention of arguing. Words are too good to waste on such an absurd proposition that because our fathers hated, we, who are independent and intelligent beings, should not marry when every drop of heart's blood demands its rights. As for your vow, what is a vow? Hysterical egotism, nothing more. Were it the promise of man to man, the subject would be worth discussing, but we will settle the matter in our own way. He took her suddenly in his arms and kissed her. She put her arms about him and clung to him, trembling, her lips pressed to his. In that supreme moment he felt not happiness, but a bitter desire to bear her out of the world into some higher sphere where the conditions of happiness might possibly exist. On the highest pinnacle we reach, he thought, we are granted the tormenting and chastening glimpse of what might be, had God, when he compounded his victims, been in a generous mood and completed them. And she was a woman. You will resist no longer, he said in a few moments. Yes, more surely than ever now. Her voice was faint, but crossed by a note of terror. In that moment I forgot my religion and my duty, and what is so sweet it cannot be right. Do you so despise your womanhood The most perfect thing about you. Oh, let us return. I wanted to kiss you once. I meant to do that, but I shouldn't let us go. Oh, I love you so. I love you so. He pulled her closer and kissed her until her head fell forward and her body became heavy. I will think and act now for both, he said unsteadily, although there was no lack of determination in his voice. You are mine. I claim you, and I won't take any more risks of losing you. Oh, you will forgive me, my love. Neither of them noticed a man walking quickly up the trail. Suddenly the man jumped and ran towards them. It was Samboro. Ah, I have found you, he cried. Listen, Don Jose Melendez, ruler of the North, American, and aspiring dictator of the Californias. 2 hours ago, I sent a cowboy with a circular letter to the priests of the Department of the Californias, instructing each and every one of them to immediately write to the Archbishop of Mexico and protest that the success of your ambitions would lead to the downfall of the Catholic Church in California, and revealing your plans. You may be powerful, Don Jose Melendez, but you are powerless against the hostility of the Church. They are more powerful than you, and you will never rule in California. Let go of my sister. You shall not have her either. You shall have nothing. Will you let go of her? He cried, enraged at Melendez's indifferent response to his damning news. You wouldn't have her even if I tore your heart out of your body. Melendez looked disdainfully past Selina's shoulder, although his heart felt heavy. The last resort of the oppressed and downtrodden is revenge, he said. Go. Tomorrow I will whip you in the courtyard of Fort Ross. Samboro, consumed by excitement and a thirst for more vengeance, let out a shriek of rage and lunged at him. Melendez saw the gleam of a knife and pushed Selina aside, grabbing the attacking arm, the fury in his heart fueling his strength. Samboro possessed the lithe muscles of the cowboy and gasped and writhed in the strong grip of the man who forgot that he grappled with the brother of a woman he passionately loved, only remembering that he was delighted to fight the man who had destroyed his life. Samboro attempted to stab him in the back with the knife. Melendez suddenly put his weight on the arm that held it, almost dislocating it, snatched the knife, and plunged it into his enemy's heart. Then the warm blood in his body turned cold. He stood motionless, staring at Selina, whose eyes, fixed on him, were wide with horror. Between them lay her brother's lifeless body. He turned with a moan and sat on a fallen tree trunk, supporting his chin with his hand. His profile appeared grim, worn, and aged. He stared blankly at the ground. Selina stood, still gazing at him. Her brother's final action had laid the groundwork for her lover's downfall. His death had sealed it. If the killer of an Iturbi Isala tried to rule the South, the entire region would revolt. She felt vaguely sympathetic towards Samboro, but death meant peace. This was torment coursing through her veins. The memory of the world beyond the forest grew hazy. She recalled her initial dream and turned away in disgust from the emotionless self-centeredness it represented. Superstition and tradition slipped into a hidden corner of her mind, where they would rattle their dried-up bones and crumble into dust. She only saw the figure, finally relaxed, the profile of a man with his head on the chopping block. Stepping over her brother's body, she knelt beside Melendez and cradled his head against her chest. The end.